Okay, part two of a podcast. I was scheduling right after the first one with Kyle of Level Up and got him. He's in tomorrow. I'm in today. Or you're in today. I'm in yesterday, time
I
zone
like,
wise.
I want to be a time traveler. I'm from tomorrow. I'm from the future.
You're from Tomorrowland. Oh, that's funny. We're in Disneyland. So I wanted to bring you back to go into rabbit hole on specific gut issues, as I know a lot of people struggle with IBD, IBS, Crohn's colitis, and explaining what those are. And then we'll go into how do they even happen? And then we'll finish with solutions. And you have a lot of knowledge in this, and maybe even how mold might tie into it too, whatever we come up with. So thanks for
Mhm.
bringing in your expertise and sharing your knowledge on how we can be better versions
Yeah.
of ourselves in the future.
Thanks for having me back. As a naturopath, gut health is pretty much the primary or one of the first things that we always focus in on when it comes to healing people, no matter what it is, realistically. When you look at inflammation being the cause of aging, as well as pretty much a factor in all disease processes, like majority of it's coming from your gut. You've got about 80% of your immune system is harbored around the gut. And that's basically because the gut is only one areas of your gastrointestinal tract are only one cell thick. So it's a site of susceptibility for bacteria and anything coming into your body. So your immune system kind of hangs around where it's needed the most, which is around that gut lining to prevent things from coming in and wreaking havoc. That said, you can have subclinical issues where you have this thing called leaky gut, which we discussed on the last one, which kind of is the early stages of these end stage inflammation of the gut, also known as IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, which is a prolonged period of having this inflammatory state. But it all, yeah, basically the inflammatory condition that is IBD is catastrophic to the individual who has it. It ultimately ends up as an autoimmune condition. I
Mhm.
believe why this happens is we have this lingering low level of inflammation that's constantly trickling things into our circulation. And our body essentially tries to figure out why is this happening all of the time. We're going to mount an immune response against something. We'll try, we'll kind of just try and figure out what it is. And unfortunately, it does that poorly and figures out incorrectly that our own tissue, the cells of our gut, be it in Crohn's or colitis, these are autoimmune diseases. So it starts to attack and degrade the cells of our own gastrointestinal tract, our bowel, our small intestines are ultimately incorrectly targeted by the immune system. What should have been targeted by the immune system were these things that were triggering the leaky gut, for example, be that endotoxins from bacterial overgrowth, be that glyphosate that's causing the leaky gut in a lot of people. There's a lot of things in our diet that I believe are causing this low level inflammatory leaky gut condition that if you don't fix it or get on top of it over a prolonged period of time, compounded with usually a high life stressor, for example, a lot of people who end up with Crohn's disease have gone through something significant in their life, be that a breakup, or a lot of people, actually teenagers, get the diagnosis during high school when they're going for their end of school exams and that stressful period of just becoming a teenager. Or I'm also noticing in a lot of athletes too, it's beginning to become a lot more prevalent in the healthy populations who are over exercising, burning themselves out that way too. So the underlying level of inflammation that comes from having a leaky gut, combined with life stresses, combined with, in my instance, I possibly could have got it from living in mold because that's creating a low level permeability and a huge amount of oxidative stress. And then the immune system's just trying to figure it out. It's actually not meant to work against you. That's not the inherent state of the body. It's a very maladaptive response to go after tissues of your own body, and it does not serve the survival of the organism of the human to do that. But it's kind of like it's got to try and do something, because something has to give with what's happening in the body. And this is all autoimmune diseases, not just these large bowel pathologies, but all autoimmune diseases are a maladapted immune response. So how do we fix these things? How do we remedy or bring down the symptoms? Well, what causes these things in the first place? You reduce your stress levels, you improve the diet, figure out if there are specific foods within the diet that could be triggering hyperpermeability for most people in the world, to be honest, unless you're living in Europe and using fermented sourdoughs and don't have any sensitivity or any of the genes that make you more predisposed to Crohn's disease, then gluten and wheat and seeds and nuts and grains are all not nuts, sorry, seeds and grains are probably a good starting point for a food group to emit for a while and see how you feel. And if it is improving, then that's possibly one of the most susceptible things. Peanuts are interestingly one of the food groups that I find often are pretty laden with mycotoxins, with molds, just because of the shape of the peanut itself inside of the shells. So that's, and they're often found with arsenic, surprisingly. They use arsenic in the agricultural process. So unless you're getting organic, but organic is more about pesticides than it is arsenic, incidentally. But peanuts can be another one. And honestly, when you've got permeability and leaky gut, and you've got all these weird food sensitivities that can come from that, it could be fructose intolerance, it could be lectins, that there's so many different things, FODMAPs, all these other foods. And then if you do have it and do like a food sensitivity test, it'll look like traffic lights. It'll be green for certain foods and reds for others. And it can be very confusing from an individual and even a practitioner perspective, trying to figure out, goodness, why is this person reacting to this food and this food, but not that one? And it's kind of all over the place. So demystifying it all, we'll try and do that today, working our way kind of through the whole digestive system, because treating the body in treating a disease process is never how I like to look at treating an individual. You got to treat the whole system. Like, everything is interconnected. The whole body is this complex web of autonomic nervous system, of immune system, of digestive system, vascular system, cardiovascular system. It's all connected. So obviously, if one system goes down or has a disease pathology, like, we will directly target that one with interventional things. But you do have to support the rest of the body, because as we've said, like, how do you heal the gut when your nervous system and your vagus nerve are completely dysregulated, right? Like, the stress response is directly inflammatory. If you're constantly stressed, people inherently know this. If you're stressed, you're more susceptible to getting sick. If you're stressed and you do have some autoimmune disease that you're keeping completely in check, the stress alone, you could be completely perfect on all the other things, but the stress alone can cause a flare or make it come back, or the symptoms get worse. So that's sort of the higher level thing to look at before we go into all the nitty gritty on gut thing, is just autonomic system, nervous system, adrenals, taking adaptogens, making sure you got activated B vitamins to help your stress response. Don't over exercise, don't over sauna, and just try and keep a really balanced life and relationships too. Let me know when you want to head deeper into Crohn's and colitis, because I've kind of given the overarching sort of philosophical and naturopathic foundations more so than anything of pathology or mechanism.
Yeah, I love it. So it's a good overview. So we're talking really about Crohn's and colitis. Irritable bowel disease is a type of autoimmune issue. You're speaking of where the body's attacking itself. Is that your definition of autoimmune?
Yeah, exactly. Self-immune response. Yes.
Yeah, and often if someone has one autoimmune, as well, I know celiac, for example, they often get a secondary type of autoimmune. Is that true? If you have one, you have another?
Usually it's not always the case, but usually when you have one immune, like autoimmune, like you might get lupus as well as having Crohn's or colitis or something like that. It's just because that immune system's dysregulated. It's kind of freaking out. Something's poisoning in it, something's hurting the body, and it hasn't figured it out. So rather than, taking targeted and measured swings at an actual target, it's kind of flailing its arms around and punching anything and everything that it thinks could be the problem. It's a little bit out of control, is an analogous way of looking at autoimmune disease. And, in reducing the perceived stress, it's like, well, if it's going to be swinging its arms and trying to punch everything and anything it thinks is a threat, well, let's remove all the other things that aren't threats that it's potentially confused about. Let's remove bacterial overgrowths, for example. That's a really big thing. Lipopolysaccharide, LPS, endotoxins from bacterial overgrowth. Things like what is it? H. pylori is often something that people who end up with bowel disease will have had at some point in their life. There's just other dysbiosis. It can be because of a lack of the beneficial ones like a Akkermansia or Bifidobacterium species, and overgrowths in Klebsiella, Candida, E. coli, all these other ones reduce the short chain fatty acid production because they don't actually make them. The beneficial ones do. And therefore your mucus barrier, the moat that surrounds your intestinal cells that protects them, is now degraded or is not there. So that one cell layer is just like the castle wall without a moat, and is a lot more susceptible to breakdown from any of the things in the environment that could be disrupting and breaking down that wall. So liver health's another one too. Anyone who's got Crohn's, colitis, celiac, who's drinking alcohol is basically asking for a very bad time. Alcohol is just very destructive to both your liver health and your gut microbiome, as well as the junctions of your gut. So, you can make some swaps if you can. Try and remove that. I think your audience is pretty much saying don't drink alcohol is like saying the grass is green. So I won't harp on that point too much. But yeah, I'm really intrigued by the why, and I feel like we've discussed enough. But I don't want to. You can cut this out if you don't think it's appropriate. But I also believe that vaccinations and the adjuvants, more specifically in the vaccinations, are why we're seeing a huge rise in autoimmune disease. The purpose of the adjuvants is to trigger an immune response with the aluminium, with the not mercury. It used to be mercury, but now it's aluminium. These things are highly inflammatory in purpose, because if they weren't actually included, then we wouldn't get those immune responses. The issue with them, the adjuvants, not the actual antigens, is they trigger that immune response. And if we concurrently have leaky gut, and we have food particles, or we have parts of our own tissue that the immune system is triggered to react, and it finds those things like an egg protein, or something that looks like the connective tissue of your gut, or something that looks like the tissue of your joints or your thyroid, or any of these autoimmune things, then the adjuvants have been the trigger, and the body has incorrectly identified something that it shouldn't as the problem. So that, I believe, is why we've got a lot of autoimmunity now. And I feel like Kennedy is completely on board with that theory. So we'll see what happens at a policy level. But
yeah,
bowel disease. Sorry, I tend to get a bit distracted. Let's dive a little bit deeper into that one, what it actually looks like to people. If you want to.
One moment, but the Crohn's and colitis, can you just give a definition of each one, and then we can go into the gut, what goes wrong that causes problems, if you can give a little overview?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the overlap between the two. It's destruction of tissue in the small and large bowel. Ulcerative colitis is usually in the large bowel. It starts sort of around the rectum and tends to work its way up, so to speak, whereas Crohn's disease can be anywhere. It can be in the small intestine, it can be in the large intestine as well, and it's characterized by what are called skip lesions, where you'll have like one little patch of inflammation, and then you might have completely healthy, fine functioning bowel tissue for, I don't know, another meter, and then you might have another area where it's got like strictures and cobblestonings, another one of the characteristics of it. It's whereas colitis is usually just one continuous area of inflammation, usually around the bowel. So it's more common to see bleeding and blood in the stool with colitis than it is Crohn's disease, even though it's still possible for both. They are diagnosed via a few different things. Obviously, clinical picture, if you've got issues with malnourishment, B12, B9 are usually very low in people with both of these conditions. You can get severe deficiencies in iron because of that blood loss as well. Folate is B9. That's quite often very severely deficient in people with Crohn's, moderately in colitis. Zinc's often low as well. And this is all because that inflammatory state in the bowel reduces the ability of the GI tract to absorb all of the things that you're taking in dietarily. And then also that blood loss is absolutely horrible for anemia and iron. And when your iron's down, then your thyroid tends to go down. So that's like the clinical picture. From an actual diagnostic perspective, the colonoscopy is a really powerful scope, basically a camera that they put up to see. You can visually see it. If it's progressed to the point where you've got these things, you will be able to see inflammatory patches. It's easier for colitis because of where it is, but you might have to have a little capsule that's a camera as well, where they send down and then they see all the areas of inflammation. Calprotectin is a marker that they look at to diagnose these things, but then there's also all the regular blood inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, ESR. Usually liver functions impaired as well, because when you've got this inflammation in your gut, then the things that should be barriered away from the metaphorical castle walls are now entering circulation and then putting burden on your liver. So you'll often see elevated liver enzymes and low iron. From a diagnostic perspective, that's sort of how the doctors treat it. From a real world perspective, what does it actually look like? Well, pain, indigestion, you've got issues with bloating, you might have constipation or diarrhea or a combination of both, excess mucus in your bowel movements, food intolerances, pain. It's not a particularly nice situation to be in, but once you're at the stage of IBD, then often blood in the stool is the primary marker, and it's a very difficult thing to get on top of, these autoimmune responses and these really high level of inflammation. If you did something like a cytokine test, you'd see a huge level of elevated inflammatory mediators like interleukins and cytokines. So naturopathically and lifestyle is just live and supplement anti-inflammatories as best you can to try and knock down that immune response, that autoimmune response, that hyper-inflammatory state. But then also there will be a lot of nutrient deficiency that will need to be rectified through like a multivitamin, through even IV infusions. I think are probably necessary to get iron levels back, to get B12 and B9 levels back. Because if you do have this inflammation in your bowel and you're taking supplements that are just like a multivitamin or a mineral, how well are they going to be absorbed while you've still got this inflammatory condition sort of preventing them from working as well as they should do in someone who doesn't have these issues? I'll stop for a second and let you put me back on track, because I feel like I just tangent away from potentially the question.
No, it's good. So we went over kind of Crohn's and colitis, IBD, IBS, irritable bowel disorder, that's more blood in the stool, versus IBS. And then we just went over symptoms. But going back to what we talked about a little bit in the beginning, working upstream of how this happens is it's not just one thing, but why is the body attacking itself? Why are we having Crohn's and colitis? Is it multiple reasons? But just review how people often get help. Why did they get this Crohn's and colitis versus other people don't?
Yeah, well, it's just that prolonged state of inflammation in the bowel. Like I could have the early stages of it, but usually I'll do things in my diet, in my life, to make that inflammatory response just an acute one. Like I might eat some gluten, cause transient permeability, or drink some alcohol, and then have that first step along the road, of which you might need to walk for a kilometer or a mile before you end up with this condition. Whereas with the lifestyle things you do when you don't have these things, you only ever allow yourself to walk a couple feet before you do all the things to sort of backtrack. And that means figuring out what foods inflame you realistically. Like everyone's different. If, as I said, with those intolerance tests, like it's so difficult to do those ones and actually draw like concrete conclusions because everyone's different around what foods they can and can't eat. Some people might react to rice, some people might react to wheat, some people might react to pork. It's so bio individual that I can't like give broad strokes apart
Mhm.
from saying maybe like the autoimmune paleo diet could be the best of the diets to follow. But even as extreme as carnivore, like a lot of people have been finding relief with that one. I
Yep.
don't think it's a cure necessarily. I just think it's a diet of inflammatory emission rather than whilst also concurrently having a lot of things that support connective tissue, which is what the gut lining is. So, that could be a short term thing. I don't feel like it's the best long term because having a disrupted microbiome, not having butyrate producing bacteria is something that can happen if you do an emission diet for too long. I believe that might have happened to myself when I did carnivore for a few months, but bringing it back with probiotics, having certain types of fibers that you don't react to that can make those short chain fatty acids, which directly fuel the cells of the colon. And when they're fueled properly, they can repair a lot better. They can absorb nutrients better. They can reabsorb water and basically create the mucus better. It's just a really good situation. And that's why a lot of the plant-based people, I think they're wrong most of the time. But one thing I think they're right, which the carnivore people get wrong, is fiber. It's annoyingly important. You just have to have the right bacteria species to utilize it, and don't just do any fibers. Like kind of like diet, one fiber for one person might be the right types, or it might completely ruin them and cause bloating and issues. So
Mhm.
again, work with a practitioner would be my advice. It's a very complicated thing, an autoimmune condition. Even IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome versus inflammatory bowel disease, that's the difference between the two. Even IBS, which is just more characterized by pain and inconsistent bowel movements, that one can be hard enough to get on top of, let alone something where you actually have an autoimmune inflammatory condition that does require a really good chunk of time to get on top of. Like you can use all the best naturopathics, you can use all the best peptides, but it's still going to take you quite a long time to get on top of this thing. We're talking maybe 3 months before you start to see some initial like results sticking, to even up to a year before you get to sort of that mark that you might want to or get to with pharmaceuticals. And when I say get
Mhm.
to with pharmaceuticals, it's like not a holistic way to get to it with the pharmaceuticals. You might feel really good, but then it doesn't ever stick, or you might just get symptom relief. For
Mhm.
IBD, a lot of the time they use things that suppress the immune system or completely tank it. Instead of asking why the immune system is attacking our own cells of our gut, the solution from pharmaceuticals is to blame the immune system and basically use immunotherapies that target one of the cytokines that are made by the immune system to prevent that cytokine from inducing an inflammatory response. Or they just give things like chemotherapeutic agents to tank the immune system. And if the immune system's not responding, it won't be destroying the bowel, it won't be destroying the tissue, and it won't be able to make that immune response. But that's a very short-sighted approach and often
Mhm.
leads to worse outcomes as well as increasing risk of cancers and things long term. So anytime you suppress the immune system, you're immunocompromised, viruses, bacterial infections, all of that. Candida is often something that sparks up and can occur as well when you
Yeah.
do the conventional route. But the alternative route does take a lot longer to feel as good as you might feel after, I'm not saying chemo is going to make you feel good, but the immunotherapies might, because they're not destroying healthy cells as well. So how do we heal these? How do we heal something like this? You work on the mucous membrane. I mentioned that a little earlier around
Mhm.
fiber and having good bacterial species.
Wait,
Inflammation.
time
Let's
out there, because that's a big topic that you mentioned a few things before, but just pausing on the prebiotics and fibers, because this is where I think I hear different podcasts and Dr. William Davis speaking of this and Dr. Ruscio, that if it depends, you hear all these different camps. We need fiber, carnivore people, we don't need fiber. But as you said, there's short chain fatty acids, the bacteria, certain bacteria we need to feed because they create short chain fatty acids. And one of them is butyrate, and that helps builds our mucus lining, right? So am I
Mhm.
saying that right? And
Yeah, the
so,
butyrate is the cells which make the mucus. Yeah.
yeah, so we need that. to keep a healthy microbiome gut wall lining? What gets
Yes.
confusing is a whole debate you hear all the time about fiber. And I've come down to the conclusion that not all fiber is good. As you said, people with gut issues, they don't want a lot of fiber. And there's certain types, but there is research showing that we do need to support the bacteria to get short chain fatty acid production for butyrate for gut health.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the fiber mentality, is it more, does we need certain types of prebiotic fiber? And as you said, it depends on the gut type. As Dr. Ruscio talks about in his show, 3 different types of gut type to decide what is best for you to help create a healthy microbiome and a healthy microbiome or gut wall lining.
Yeah. So there's like, yeah, 4 different fibers that everyone's like, just saying taking fiber is kind of just like saying take a protein powder, right? It could be a whey protein, might be great. It could be a collagen. What are you talking about specifically? Fermented fibers might be good, but then they're going to be full of histamines, for example, prebiotics like apple pectin, like carrots, like kiwi skin. They're low fermentable, low FODMAP fibers that might be really good, but then these high FODMAPs, like some really long acronym that's basically highly fermentable, like inulin, fructooligosaccharides. These ones can cause problems in people, and they're a fiber that's meant to be health giving. But if you have bacterial conditions like SIBO, for example, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, the bacteria will feed on the fiber. So I guess the primary thing before I reckon or suggest you bring in fiber is making sure that you've got a healthy microbiome, right? Because if you are bringing in fiber and are feeding pathogenic bacterial species, which will use it as well, then you're only going to create more of an issue. There are good fibers, I think, work for most people. PHGG, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, is a soluble fiber that I believe works really well. Apple pectin is one that directly feeds Akkermansia muciniphila, which is the darling of the the probiotic species at the moment. And to your point about like the carnivore versus plant-based people, certain types of collagen can be fermented into short-chain fatty acids too. And it's not like animal sources can't become fatty acids. It's just a different way. Like ultimately, the end goal is to have these short-chain fatty acids. You can supplement them as well with like tributyrin, which is in GI repair, or as a standalone thing, or sodium butyrate, and that will directly feed the enterocytes and colonocytes. You don't necessarily need the fiber, but as far as like, what can you do daily? Well, you're not going to be taking a supplement every single day, and nor is that advisable. You want to get it out of the 90% of your life, which is your diet. Like you can take the supplements away, but you can't take your food away. So honestly, having good foods, and that I'm not going to beat around the bush. What's right for you or what's right for me and anyone listening is so individual that I'm not going to be one of these polarizing figures who just creates these sweeping statements that I believe should apply to everyone. But another thing that's important is to make sure whatever fiber you're getting is organic. Like I feel like that's more important as well, because some fibers are going to be laden with glyphosate and pesticides, which are going to not help your gut lining at all. Quite the opposite, and they're very strongly linked in with cancers too. So, and even some fibers might be contaminated with gluten too. It depends on where they come from. So, yeah.
Also, isn't hyaluronic acid that's in organ meat? That's, I heard Dr. Davis talked about that a few times about how that can help with a type of fiber.
Hyaluronic acid helps with a type, or works like a type of fiber.
Okay.
Well, it would help with the connective tissue for sure. It's in skincare for that exact reason. It's in a lot of my products as a functional adjuvant, so to speak, alongside BPC, because it helps with connective tissue and hydration. I didn't know that it works, that it was fermentable, but it might be, and provide fatty acids as well. But yeah, that's an interesting point. I wish I had more to add about that one for
I have to verify, but that's what he said. So I was like, oh, you can get, feed the microbiome from taking organ meats in your diet. Maybe that would help if you're not a plant person at all, the strict carnivore.
Yeah.
So interesting research to come on that Okay, so going back to order of operations and talking about solutions. So we have these symptoms, we know something's wrong. We talked about the symptoms, mentioned a few different lab tests, and then we're going into solutions, nutrition, exercise, lifestyle, and supplementation. So first, before we go into solutions, touch on what type of functional lab tests would you suggest to help people, as you mentioned a few things.
Yeah, so you could do a fecal microbiome test, the lovely test where you get a little spoon and dig through your poo
It
and send
always
it off
makes me
to
vomit.
analysis. Yeah, it's probably the worst. I mean, maybe some people don't like getting their blood taken, so they prefer to do that, but
Hmm.
it's not pleasant. But if you've got a toddler or had a kid, then it's probably familiar territory for you. Anyway, in doing that test, they will analyze your gut for markers like zonulin and calprotectin. You'll get all the inflammatory um, intestinal health markers for your own body from some of them, not all of them. But you'll also be told and given a breakdown of, do you have fungal overgrowth? Do you have SIFO, small intestinal fungal overgrowth, Candida albicans? It will let you know sort of what your bacterial species are at. So that's the microbiome support. Like, understand you can't just throw stuff at the microbiome, not without knowing sort of where you're at first. You could throw Akkermansia, which is everyone's favorite in biohacking. You could throw that at it, but if you already have high Akkermansia species, you can create a problem. So you need to know where you're at, and assessing your baseline for any probiotic is very beneficial. What's the other thing? It can test for parasites. That's another hidden reason behind why some people might end up with IBD is they could have a parasitic overgrowth, which is just creating that constant inflammation and actually feeding on the mucus and the cells of your own intestinal lining. I don't feel like it's as common, but if you have been doing a plant-based diet, for example, then you do often end up with parasites, because by omitting animal protein from your diet, you're essentially reducing the amount of hydrochloric acid long term that your body will produce in the stomach. And HCl is a sterilizing ingredient as well as something that breaks down the protein. It sterilizes all these parasites that might be in the food. It's an unfortunate reality. When you eat something, there's a good chance there'll be bacteria or fungus or parasites in or on it, and usually that's completely fine. If your stomach acid between 1 to 2 pH hits it immediately, they're dead and nothing's going to happen with it. Versus if you've just been plant-based or you've been on proton pump inhibitors or anti-reflux medication, and your stomach acid doesn't dip down low enough to kill these these parasites, then that's when you can end up with a parasitic infection, or you're more likely to end up with a fungal overgrowth or bacterial overgrowth without that sterilizing HCl. So that can be a really big upstream way before you get symptoms. That could be sort of one of the, oh, I wasn't the same since I started taking XYZ, or be it a proton pump inhibitor or reflux medication or antacids. They're a really early stage thing that people commonly do, unfortunately, that I believe can go on to ripple effect in some very big, bad ways later on.
Well, so it's good to do a timeline when you have these problems. I think go sit down and journal out your big moments in life that you feel like that could be part of your story to where you are today that impact your gut health.
Yep, gut health too, antibiotic use, C-section if you were natural, or C-section birth. If you've ever had your appendix removed, for example, that's a harbinger for many, many, many species of bacteria. It kind of is like the bank of bacteria that if you need it repopulated, that's where it's drawn from. And if you've had your appendix removed, then that can be a problem too. Yeah. If you've had your appendix removed and appendicitis, then there's a chance that you probably had some problems way before that. But the gastrointestinal tract is a very well-designed system that if we eat the way we're meant to eat, removed all the processed foods, nourish our body, then it should realistically work the way it's meant to. If we remove the inflammatory things, then you don't need a supplement with a peptide like BPC, for example, because BPC is made in the stomach. And sorry to tangent off to that peptide if we're a bit early on it, but it's made in our stomach.
Just go into the solutions onto supplementation, because we we all want to know about peptides, and your products are amazing. So if we kind of go into solutions on the peptides, because you're there, and then we'll go back to the other part, nutrition, exercise, whatever else we need to do.
Well, I'll just touch on BPC and we'll go back to solutions later, but it's made endogenously in our stomach acid to heal our intestinal tract in our stomach. The cells of our stomach turn over very, very fast because of that acid. Therefore, we make this peptide, which accelerates the healing process, the connective tissue of the stomach. And then it trickles down through the digestive juices into our small intestine. And if we don't have a heap of inflammation there, then it will trickle all the way through to our large intestine and act locally. And that's our natural BPC usage. Because of inflammatory lifestyles and all of the things that create the inflammation in the body, I feel like the BPC that our body produces naturally gets used up way before it should, or way faster than it normally would. Therefore, that's why a lot of people are getting benefits from supplementing with an oral BPC, because they're bringing it back to like a physiological level, or even exceeding what their body would naturally produce, because it's necessary to quench the inflammation and help with the connective tissue repair. So that's BPC. And even like things like zinc, for example, people, a zinc L-carnosine is a fantastic nutrient that people use for stomach ulcers, dyspepsia, reflux. Zinc is getting burnt through so fast nowadays. Zinc deficiency, I don't know if you see it yourself, but was one of the main things that I saw in patients and had myself as well. And again, zinc is used for many, many reasons, immune health, but also gut health and healing of the intestinal lining. So I feel like when people presenting with zinc deficiencies, there's a good chance they'll have some level of inflammatory gut condition, not inflammatory bowel like pathology, but some level of inflammation in the gut. And that was personally my experience. I finally rectified my zinc deficiency too, which has been a long-standing challenge of mine. But living in mold is another thing that sort of reduces your zinc levels big time. Yeah.
So with you're talking solutions to help with people with Crohn, colitis, IBD, IBS. We talked about testing, and then solutions with nutrition. We talked about food a lot. So just removing gluten, inflammatory foods. But I think getting a food sensitivity test is, I don't know what, if you do MRT or food zoomers, do you have a special test to identify what foods are putting more fuel on the fire?
I mean, some people, it's a controversial topic saying, do you do a food sensitivities test? I believe I believe that if you're sensitive to a food, it doesn't mean you're sensitive to the food forever.
Yes.
So if you're doing a test and now you're showing all these reds that you're sensitive to them, please remove them, because that will reduce the inflammatory burden, but it doesn't mean that you're forever allergic to them.
Yeah.
Gluten maybe is the exception to that rule, but if you're egg protein, for example, that if you're constantly consuming egg whites, you can develop sensitivity to that. I'm never going to tell people to omit egg for the rest of their life, but if you are reacting to a protein found in egg and you currently have leaky gut, then when you consume that egg, you are going to trigger that immune response. But if you're showing up high in all these things, removing them is only going to transiently or short term help you reduce that inflammation. If you don't work on restoring the gut lining, the barrier integrity, and sealing up the gut, then you will probably react to those foods indefinitely until you work on that root cause of why your immune system is reacting to them. So then that brings us into, how do we heal the gut? How do we seal that leaky gut, as it's called, or as they call it in PubMed and medicine, hyperpermeability? Well, the best one that I've ever found is BPC, and that's why I make it in a product, and it's the primary mover in our GI repair product. But there's plenty of things you can do before you go down the expensive and very heavy-hitting route of peptides. Zinc supplementation, quercetin supplementation, eating connective tissue-rich foods like lamb shanks, glycine, collagen, bone broth, all these amino acids that support connective tissue and gut integrity are going to be highly beneficial for healing the gut, sealing the gut. Butyrate is another one. You can eat butter. You can have prebiotics if you want to. If you don't want to, please make sure you're getting plenty of butter and ghee, and collagen can be fermented into a different type of a short chain fatty acid too. But honestly, I feel like the biggest movers are omission rather than addition. So removing grains, removing like nightshades transiently, removing the ones that you found from the testing that you're reacting to. Milk's often one that I feel like people love, but then will still react to. So it's again a bio individual approach depending on how you react to certain things. For example, like I feel like I react to rice when I'm in a highly inflamed state. If I've been exercising or exposed to mold, there's certain proteins in rice, for example, that I react to. Yet for most people in the world, rice is one of the simplest and the easiest to digest and the most hypoallergenic foods. So
Yeah.
to just, yeah, anyway.
But with that, you just said, rice and eating different foods. I know some people, there's a pro triathlete down in Australia. Ah,
Mhm.
blinking his name. He did Ironmans and went to half Ironmans, and then he started doing strict carnivore, but he had IBS or IBD or some type of one of those. But he was healing his gut, getting into the foods you're just talking about, more of a carnivore based healing diet. So do you feel that, you said temporarily that might help some people remove these foods that are causing problems to gut issues and that healing and fix the problem,
Mhm.
then reintroduce them?
I firmly believe that's probably the safest approach, unless meat, for some whatever reason, is something you're reacting to. Um, Certain people might lack that hydrochloric acid and then throw a heap of meat, and hopefully that restarts it. But at the same
That's
time, if it's not happening, then it will end up fermenting in your bowel. Your bacteria will basically pick up where your stomach acid failed to put down. It will pick up the digestion of that. It will putrefy excessive protein. So in the short term, if that's happening, supplementing with hydrochloric acid, betaine HCl, taking digestive bitters before you eat, making sure your electrolytes are good, and making sure you're not taking things that are ruining your stomach acid would be a great way to make sure that you can
Mhm.
digest meat. Because I truly believe as well that meat is one of the most healing foods that you can have for gut issues. And
Mhm.
plenty of people I know, I went on a guy's podcast who has Crohn's and colitis 2 years ago, and he's kept it 100% in remission on a carnivore diet. So it certainly can work. But he's also using things like BBC. He's doing all the GI repair protocols as well as the products. So there's a lot of things that go into it. It's not just a one solution fix sort of condition. Um, and then he managed to get out of mold as well, because I've mentioned mold a few times, but nothing will work if you're living in high level of mold. It will ruin your immune system. It will rip your gut lining open worse than gluten or glyphosate ever will. And you won't get anywhere, and you'll be very frustrated and think your practitioner is useless. So,
Saying
um,
from experience, it sounds.
oh yeah, yeah. Mold's one of the
Mm.
gifts that keeps giving. Every time I travel and we go somewhere humid, we end up staying in a hotel or an Airbnb that has mold in it. And I just get a little reminder from the universe that, yeah, this stuff's serious and you need to be a bit more aggressive in avoiding it. So
Hey, hold on there. If you next time you travel, let me remind me later, send you. There's microbiome solutions or microbalance solutions. They have a candle that you can take to kill off the mold spores in the air when you're in hotel rooms.
that's a good idea. I know those ones. Yeah. They work as
Yeah,
long as the candle lasts.
I know.
So,
They're just little travel candles, but I know I'm going to Italy actually in a few days. We're going for 2 weeks. And the same thing, you're just worried about your environment, mold in an Airbnb, and then eating foods and glyphosate. I'm not so worried when you go to Europe, but that was another question before I want to get into your supplements is that food and the problems that you see as a naturopath with Crohn's and colitis gut issue clients, do they come from certain countries more than others? See any patterns?
interestingly, the geographical balance tends to be people who are further from the equator, because I believe vitamin D is the
Ah,
most easy to blanket statement say that. I think that's true for sure. Mold clusters, you end up with more issues like that, but also people growing up around industrial or agricultural areas tend to have a high bioaccumulation just from being exposed to it in their environment or their drinking
mm,
water. I think there's a heat map it looks like a heat map of the United States, where they look at all of the cancer clusters that overlapped pretty much directly with autoimmunity around the
Yeah,
Mississippi, where all the
I've seen
glyphosate
that.
sort of trickles down. That would certainly be another, if I had to categorize geographically where you'd see issues. I think every health condition would follow that exact cluster, and autoimmunity would certainly
I
100% fit that
You
picture.
can, I should find where that is. I saw years ago, Dr. Zach Bush did a seminar when they first started the ion biome, and he has all those pictures and just how the water color, the dark color from a satellite from those Midwest areas from all the farmland and glyphosate runoff. It's
Oh
crazy.
yeah, it's
So,
I'm glad Kennedy knows that it's a problem, because maybe finally there will be some level of turning the Titanic around before it hits the iceberg. But we're kind of
well,
at a situation now where like the gut issues for the world are so prevalent now. There's something like, what was the last statistic I heard? Some like 3% of the population, which is a high amount of people, have like a gut issue. 40% of people identify with IBS, but like 3% of America have IBD, or it might be 0.3, because that seems a little bit high. But this is the end stage thing. It's about, it will be at least 1% of the population of America have this life shortening, life altering. It's not good if you have IBD. It's not like for us if we ate gluten and were bloated. This is your state of existence for months at a time. There's blood in your stool, there's pain all of the time, there's huge emotional dysregulation because of that inflammation inflaming your brain all the time. If you eat the wrong thing, you might be out of action and depressed or psychotic or just absolutely all over the place for a week because of these things.
mhm.
I empathize very deeply for people who have IBD, Crohn's and colitis, and it can go either way too with like your body. What happens to it? You can get really inflamed and get quite fat and large, or you can get completely malnourished and not absorb anything and like strip half of your body weight and almost end up in hospital because of that too. Or the end stage to it as well is if your bowel is so inflamed, they often do a surgical procedure called a stroma bag, where it's essentially a bag that you defecate into to prevent any food or any of your diet passing by that area of inflammation in your bowel, and to allow it a small opportunity, hopefully, to heal over if it's going to at all. So it's nasty. It's a very bad thing, and it's very, if not managed, can shorten your life by like half, for example.
Wow.
So a lot of empathy for
Sheesh.
people doing that.
Yeah, that sounds horrible. All right. So, last little bit, because I know you have a busy day. People are listening, know about you and your supplements and your peptides. So, what are the go-to supplements you have to help people with gut issues? What's your order of operations in the supplement world?
Yeah. So the reason I can empathize is my housemate, when I began LvLUP, she had Crohn's disease. Never ended up taking the product because she was a nurse and knew better. But I basically made a product for her that's gone on to now help tens of thousands of people with their bowel issues, including IBDs. The primary ingredient is BPC 157, body protection compound. This ingredient, as I mentioned earlier, is made in our stomach acid for the purposes of helping accelerate healing in the stomach, and by extension, it will work in the GI tract. It's really beneficial it would be very beneficial for Crohn's and colitis in animal models. It's been studied. It reduces the permeability of the gut and reduces that inflammatory response, and directly works on the cells of your small and large intestines, and it stimulates the growth factors which allow them to basically just to heal from the and recover from this inflammatory condition. It's directly anti-inflammatory whilst also stimulating growth of new cells within the stomach, because that will be very necessary if you have these conditions, but also potentially salvaging the ones that are kind of on that seesaw. They could go either way between they probably need to die and be replaced, or they can be brought back with stimulating the collagen networks within the cell, helping restore the tight junctions, which are like the Velcro that keep them together. That's really important. That's where something like gluten will break those junctions down. That Velcro will break, and then you'll have permeability, which will cause all sorts of inflammation. Another ingredient that we use a lot in candida, bacteria, candida overgrowth, mold issues, as well as Crohn's disease and UC, is KPV, which is a peptide fragment of alpha MSH, which is a peptide made in your brain, melanocyte stimulating hormone. Melanocortin system is a very powerful anti-inflammatory um, NRF2 activating cascade pathway that's amazing for reducing inflammation. It does it very well in autoimmune conditions like Crohn's disease. It has been studied in. And it also suppresses histamine responses, which is often one thing that the body does when you have issues is it releases a whole heap of histamine as like a non-specific way to try and reduce the burden on the burden on the gut. So if it doesn't know what's causing it, histamine causes a flushing reaction. It'll often cause diarrhea or like watery stools, and that's just to flush things out. If you have parasites, you'll have a high amount of histamine because the immune system's too small to kill the parasite. So it leverages histamine as its primary way to try and like hit the emergency evacuation button on your bowels and get them out that way. But if parasites aren't the issue, if permeability is the issue, then again, you'll have high levels of histamine. Often histamine-rich foods like avocado or bone broth and collagen and fermented or slow-cooked meats can be an issue if histamine is an issue too. So that's where like carnivore is not always going to fix gut issues for people.
Mm-hmm.
But it could if they do only steaks because they're not slow-cooked. But anyway, that's KPV. KPV is this is another way that mold is particularly damaging. Is mold knocks out MSH basically in the body, so it will basically make it that you don't have much KPV in your system in circulation, and therefore your immune system's more likely to be overactivated, or you're not going to have that anti-inflammatory cascade activated. The other peptide I utilize it's actually called the anti-celiac peptide. It's called the razotide. That just works as a tight junction regulator. It inhibits zonulin from binding. Zonulin's triggered by gluten, by glyphosate, by all the things that sort of create permeability. And by blocking that one, you get to keep those junctions together. And then by keeping the junctions regulated and together, that basically creates a stronger castle wall in that analogy I was talking about with the moat and the castle. It's like having stronger concrete between the bricks of your house by taking lorazepam, whilst the BPC and the KPV work on the actual brick or the stone to make that have better integrity. The lorazepam is the concrete that keeps it together. So that's the peptide analogy for how they work.
Is that one or is that three different types? Three different
all these peptides I'm mentioning, I have as standalone, but in the interest of making an all-in-one product, Ultimate GI Repair has all of them, as well as this next one, GHK Copper, which stimulates basically wound healing genes. It suppresses inflammation and enhances stem cell activation in the intestinal tract, as well as on your skin. That's why it's in a lot of skincare now, and collagen remodeling. So mechanistically, all of these peptides work on acute inflammation. They work on barrier restoration, as well as reducing that overall inflammatory burden. So that's the rationale behind that product. But starting at a cheaper price point, I mentioned zinc. Zinc's fantastic for stimulating mucosal barrier repair. It also inhibits NF-kappa beta, which is like the master of all inflammatory pathways. And it supports that mucus production. If you can work on supporting your mucous membranes, if your wall is 1 cell thick in your gut, but your mucous membrane is like 100 times thicker than that. If you have good mucus production, then you are providing like a force field to your cells from all of the things that would come in and create havoc and create problems. So that's where zinc's fantastic. Zinc L-carnosine specifically, because the zinc does something in the L-carnosine, which again, a really good head nod to being a animal-based person, is you are getting a lot of carnosine out of your red meats. that is directly anti-inflammatory as well, and a very essential. I mean, it's a non-essential, but it is essential for the healing of the gut lining and as an anti-inflammatory amino acid. So that by itself is probably the first. If money is a factor and you don't want to spend a whole lot, start with a zinc L-carnosine. If it will take care probably of most H. pylori that can be sitting dormant. I think like 50% of people have had it or have a propensity to develop H. pylori. So knocking that one down with that one while supporting barrier integrity with zinc carnosine is probably a very good starting point. And then the butyrate that I mentioned before, we spoke about quite a lot. It's another really beneficial ingredient for reducing that inflammation, helping tight junction repair. And it actually supports your microbiome too. The butyrate stabilizes your microbial populations and fosters the colonization of the bacterial species that will then go on to produce butyrate too. So it's a very, very beneficial fatty acid to supplement, as sodium butyrate, magnesium butyrate, or the best of them all is called tributyrate or tributyrin. And then eating things in your diet that will, allow you to make butyrate is fantastic. Like certain red fruits are fantastic for that. Pomegranate's good for akkermansia, which is good for that too. And then butter, milk, I think actually has some level of butyric acid in it. So that's where the again, like if you're going to pick plant-based or animal-based, it's a pretty clear-cut decision that animal-based is going to be so much better for healing the gut. And then using that combined with a product like Ultimate GI or taking the naturopathic things that soothe the mucous membranes. And then once you've done that for a while and you're seeing results, just slowly and cautiously reintroduce foods is my opinion. I think you would agree with that one. Start with carnivore as your base, remove anything that's inflaming you. I think Michaela Peterson was trying to do this, but interestingly, she found out she was living in mold. That's why every time she reintroduced anything, it didn't work and had to pretty much revert back to meat. But I personally believe that start with that as your foundation, take your supplements, and then reintroduce things that aren't mechanistically less likely to cause a reaction. So don't start by reintroducing a high FODMAP food or just like, oh, I've been eating animal based. Now I'm going to try like wheat. That would be, obviously you're going to create issues, but something like rice, for example, I reacted to it, but I theoretically, if I get out of mold long enough and calm my immune system down, that is low allergenic and low, that doesn't cause inflammation for most people, that you could reintroduce as well. And honey is like such an easy no-brainer, and vegetables that are organic. It really shouldn't be too difficult if you're doing all the right things environmentally and then dietarily, having those foundational things, your steaks, your connective tissues, your bone broth. Don't just eat connective tissue. I mean connective tissue rich meats like roasts that have the bone in them, for example, or lamb shanks. An amazing meal that I get to eat quite a lot now that I live in New Zealand. So
that's amazing. So much good information. I will add that I was talking a few episodes on cognitive health and how to avoid chronic or cognitive diseases as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia. It starts back where you're talking about. We were relating it back to the microbiome and the glycolics layer and leaky gut, and how leaky gut, leaky brain. So even though we're talking about Crohn's and colitis issues, that we're also doing this type of protocol that you're talking about, healing the gut, we're helping the brain. Would you agree?
100%. The gut brain axis is a thing, and there's a very strong mechanism that's not all of it, but one that I always cite, and that's that zonulin piece. The zonulin that's triggered by gluten creates permeability, but it acts on the blood-brain barrier. It creates leaky brain. If you have leaky brain and you have metals or you have lipopolysaccharides or inflammatory cytokines circulating, then they're going to get into your brain and affect it. And that's why I mentioned like symptom picture. What does it look like? Very, very unstable mental state when you're in a flare for IBD, be that depression or psychosis almost in some levels. Maybe that's my personal anecdotal experience, seeing my housemate only, but camera just went. But also, we're back. Sorry, knocked the camera.
Yeah. Well, I know you got to go, but I really feel passionate about helping. Gut health is really helping our cognitive health. And so, really working on a holistic approach to improve how we age, and in middle age, trying to get us to look at our future self, doing everything we can do now. So, even if you don't have all these symptoms as IBD, really taking action. And I would think, looking at your website, we'll put all the links in the show notes, but how I did it too, just doing a 60-day protocol and doing that periodically just to keep on top of it so we don't have these problems in the future.
Yeah, exactly right. Sorry if my audio quality's gone. I don't know why
No, you're
everything
good.
on me. But yeah, essentially with something like GI repair, it's expensive, but it's meant to come in as a 30 to 60-day protocol that you do only once or twice a year, provided you're doing
Mm-hmm.
everything else right. That should be all that's needed. It will work
Yeah.
so much better if you do all the protocols that make it work. BPC and peptides are like orchestrators or a the what are they called? The conductor,
Conductors. Yeah.
conductors, yeah, the conductors in the orchestra. If your orchestra has bone broths and collagens and all emission of inflammatory foods, then your symphony is going to be great, and your healing journey is going to be so much faster with that really masterful
Mm-hmm.
conductor peptides in helping all of the other things work better. The L-glutamines, the glycines, all those things are fantastic and work better with the instruction of a peptide. So
Yeah.
yeah, exactly right.
We call it metabolic harmony, is what I started calling it. It is all the players need to work together as a symphony.
I
So
like it. Metabolic
we're on
harmony.
it.
I'll be using that one in future podcasts.
I told someone else, and they're using a sweet beat for heart rate variability, metabolic harmony, and like, okay, we gotta brand it. But I think that's what it's all about. Is this a body does not work one thing at a time. Everything is working together, and all the players need to be in tune and working together to in sync. Homeostasis. So
Mm-hmm.
amazing. Well, I appreciate everything, and we'll put all the links in the show notes. People can learn more and research what you have on there. So much education, and I know you guys keep growing, and the word's getting out. So get on top of it and get on your list before they sell out again, because they're hot products over there.
Yeah, it's been really good actually. We were just in America and I got to go to some conferences while I was over there, and it's fantastic. When I first met you, that was our first ever conference,
Mm-hmm.
and very few people, excluding yourself, but a few people knew about the brand or what any of the products did. Compared to this year, it was like most people had heard of or tried it, and it was really filled my cup to hear people's success stories on the GI repair or whatever product it was that they tried. So it's really good, and we'll have to come over to America a lot more and see everyone in person and bring. Now the products are all manufactured over there too, which is great. So it makes it a lot
Yeah.
easier for people to get them. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. You're so smart, knowledgeable, so much information in that brain. So appreciate all your thoughts and wisdom and sharing it all with us today.
If any of your audience have any questions about it further too, we've got a really good customer support team, or just hit me up on Instagram. I'll try my best to get back to you. As I said, I'm
Morning.
super passionate about IBD. It's like the primary disease that I intend to eradicate or help people deal with within the
Mm.
brand. Most of the brand and even like products that I'm bringing out in the future are all targeted around gut health. So it's my biggest my equal biggest passion to peptides is gut health, and I'm happy to help anyone in any way I can. And I hope this was a good resource for people. Might have
Yes.
left some things out or missed some things, but as I said, very open to helping people. So
Well, it's on YouTube once I put it up there, and everyone share it away and get this message out there, because so many people are struggling and they don't need to be. So let's improve how we age, thrive, and not struggle. Thank you.
perfect.